Get on Team Shaq with WinBet. We're playing parlays, boosting odds, and laying the wildest prop bets. Don't miss another game. Download the WinBet sports betting app today.
Sign up today and win $200 in free bets when you place a $10 first-time wager on a straight bet or parlay. Offer subject to change. Terms and conditions at WinBet.com. Must be 21 or older and present in the state where playthrough WinBet is available. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, call 1-800-522-4700.
Blue Wire.
First pick in the 1991 NBA Draft, the Charlotte Hornets select Larry Johnson from University of...
I'm not supposed to be here, man. A lot of people from where I'm from, don't make it.
Charlotte, we're back.
All right, welcome in to an emergency pod episode of Buzz Beat. This is Brian Geisinger. I'll be joined by co-host Lee today. Unfortunately, Richie and Spencer not able to make it. Obviously, we could not plan ahead of today's big events regarding the Charlotte Hornets. Just before about noon, East Coast time today, Adrian Wojnarowski from ESPN breaks the news that the Hornets, I believe the words they used were they had relieved James Borrego, who just finished his fourth season as the head coach, relieved him as his head coaching duties. Not too long after that, the team put out a statement about 3 paragraphs long about James Borrego. That was it's seemingly signed, written, however you want to state it, by Mitch Kupchak, who continues on as in his executive capacity with the franchise. But here we go. James Borrego, 4 years done, just finished up his 4th season, and with the best record that he's had as head coach, and he is out the door. Lee, what'd you think? I've got some thoughts here, but since I did the introduction here, why don't you go ahead and take the baton from me? Thoughts on James Borrego, thoughts on the decision. What exactly are the Hornets doing here?
Right. Well, I mean, it's no surprise or secret to anyone who has even listened to us moderately consistently over the past, for me over the past year, and for you guys much longer, that from a general standpoint, I think we were all pretty big James Borrego fans. And I think we had fairly hard evidence to justify that fandom. Obviously, JB's first year was with Kemba, and his next 3 years were the post Kemba Walker era. So I think it's fair to pretty much separate those two segments altogether. It's just a completely different roster, completely different expectations. Everything changed essentially after Kemba Walker left Charlotte. So, you look at you look at the offense he was able to create here. You look at the player development wins from Devontae Graham to Jalen McDaniels to Cody Martin to Miles Bridges to PJ Washington. I mean, you can kind of go on and on. There are fair criticisms, and I think we'll get into those as well. But it is indisputable that James Borrego was and his staff were incredibly effective from a grassroots player development standpoint. That is just 100% true. He also improved his win total and win percentage every single season. The defense got better, but maybe didn't get better quick enough. Obviously, there were massive roster shortcomings there. But I think it's fair to criticize that he was not able to build at least a league average defense. What I come back to, Brian, is number one, if it was me, I would have given him another year. I felt he deserved that. The 2 play-in losses are inexcusable, particularly in back-to-back seasons. The first one, you can kind of reason away a little bit. When it happens again the very next season in almost the exact same way, I totally understand the frustrations there. That being said, this feels a bit reactionary. This feels a bit knee-jerk. And the number one thing I come to, and maybe this is a good way to pass it back to you, is okay, I understand the frustrations. I can even kind of tangle my mind into understanding why they did it. But then I go to, how is the grass going to be greener and what's the plan?
Yeah, exactly. I just did a radio hit with WFNZ down in Charlotte like an hour ago, and the first question was posed to me was like, is this a good or a bad decision? And I was like, well, without knowing who they're going to bring in, and that's something we should touch on briefly before we get out of here, but like without knowing that, this doesn't look great. I mean, it feels rough. It feels rushed. I don't know, I don't know at what point in time this move was decided. Like, but at the end of the day, it's like you can't. I know the play-in loss did not look great. They played very poorly down in Atlanta. But like you really shouldn't be making these, and we don't know if this decision was made based off of optics, but it seems like that factors into the equation. And you can't be really shouldn't be making these types of decisions based solely off of that, right? And I get that the last 2 years, the directive has been get to the playoffs. And James Borrego, because he's the head coach, he's not a player, like it's the easiest for the blame to fall at his feet and to cut bait with him. And I think that matters maybe even more so than sort of like the bad play-in losses or whatever. But James Borrego has only but so much culpability for this team like not making the playoffs. Like we've discussed this ad nauseum the last 2 seasons. Like these were an incomplete roster. They were trying to like build for the future around LaMelo and also win now. The Gordon Hayward injuries, the LaMelo Ball injury a season ago, like so much stuff, went into this. James Borrego was extended about 9 months ago, last August.
That's a great point. He was extended last summer.
Yeah. So it's a little, again, and at the time when that happened, it was sort of like, no, everything's copacetic, on the same page with LaMelo. We like the development, like good. Like, let's keep building it up here. And, then they go out and they win 43 games, which is the most they've won as a franchise in probably 6 years. And they have a top 6 offense in the NBA. I know the defense was like a hot mess. And amazingly, they ended up finishing the season like 20th in defensive efficiency. But like it felt like a bottom 5 defense for big chunks of the season. And I do think some of that you can put on Borrego. I think most of it has to do with like the personnel of this roster, which was woefully incomplete in terms of like putting together a team that could compete defensively. Like there is no point of attack defender really on the roster. There's very little rim protection. They were forced to play zone and to scramble and to try to gin up turnovers out of necessity, not because it was like, they looked around and were like, wow, we really got the personnel to like play this style. That to an extent they had good athletes on the roster in guys that can create turnovers or whatever, but they did that because they couldn't just like churn out stops on a possession by possession basis. As far as James Borrego goes, I'll say a couple of things. Lee, you touched on the player development thing. I think that's the first, like the top of the positive things that James Borrego did. You listed off some of the players. There's probably even a couple more we could name. We'll see what ends up happening with guys like JT Thor, Kai Jones. Those guys could be sort of like the last guys of the Borrego development program because they did get this first season. Borrego coming in, it ushered in the organization taking itself more seriously. Like it syncs up with when Greensboro and the G League became more of a thing. It syncs up with like
totally
the Hornets bringing their offense into the 21st century. Like it's hard to, it's easy to forget, but like the 2018-2019 season, like moving Michael K. Gilchrist Jr. to like the 4 or some small ball 5, playing Jeremy Lamb more, opening the lineup up for Kemba. And then thinking about that roster gets me back to just, you touched on this too, just like the target moved every season for James Borrego. Like he comes in and initially it's, hey, get into the playoffs with Kemba so we can re-sign Kemba and keep building it up around that. Kemba leaves. Now you're in a rebuild mode. You have 1 season of rebuilding, only 1 season, in a year that was literally interrupted by a global pandemic. You come back the next year and the directive is already, hey, time to start winning again.
Totally.
We just spent $120 million in Gordon Hayward. Time to start winning again. And I know,
and Brian, just like super quickly, it's also easy to forget that coming into that season after Kemba left, we had no idea that Devontae Graham was a rotational NBA player. Like we went into that season.
He came off the bench to start the year. Like Terry Rozier was brought in to be the starting point guard, which is like a hilarious concept to even like think about at this point. And so Borrego and his staff developing, I think Nate Mitchell is the guy that gets a lot of credit for the Devontae Graham development as well. But for them to bring Devontae along and then quickly insert him into the starting lineup and shift Rozier from the primary duties to this off-ball capacity that has carried him and had him play the best ball of his career and make, $100 million with this extension, like Borrego is, partially responsible for that. Other things I would say about Borrego, helping install a culture. I think there were towards the end of Clifford's tenure, because when Steve Clifford showed up, he installed a culture as well. And then it felt loose for a little bit there, towards the end. And then all of a sudden, James Borrego comes in and emphasis on player development, getting to the rim offensively, playing more small ball, being more creative, but installing sort of like defense notwithstanding, like some culture and some floor for like what should be expected out of the organization. And then the last thing that I would just say about James Borrego is like, as someone that charted the Hornets offense really heavily the last 3 seasons, all of which were under the guidance of James Borrego, like a creative, for the most part, a pretty creative basketball mind in terms of concepts, system, in-game adjustments, after timeout play calls, and finding stuff that could get the best out of guys like Miles Bridges, the best out of Terry Rozier. And I think the last thing I would say, and I'm circling back a little bit here too, but like it should also be noted that when Charlotte flipped the switch to winning, and especially this season, it also came with hey, we didn't replace Devontae Graham. We did not replace Malik Monk. And now you just got to do this around LaMelo, which LaMelo is amazing, but 20-year-old point guard still can't finish at the rim. So it again, the target just moved each and every season for him. But Borrego's a good coach, not perfect. I have some of my gripes in terms of like lineup management, that sort of stuff, but definitely a good coach and a guy that like made Charlotte to an extent like reputable. And so yeah, I'll be curious to see where they go from here.
Yeah, it's just you compare it to something like Ron Rivera getting let go, and it's like it's not a strict comparison, but the point I'm trying to make is like it felt, even though Ron Rivera did a really good job. Obviously, I'm talking about the former Carolina Panthers head coach, but it felt like Rivera was kind of back on his way down. Like he had taken the Panthers up, they had reached obviously like the pinnacle of the Super Bowl and Cam Newton's MVP season, winning the division a few times. And then they were kind of on this downtrend where it felt like Rivera had gotten stale. Like, it doesn't feel like Borrego's gotten stale yet to me. Like, it's felt like they were still on the uptrend. And I have always said, like, James Borrego has proven himself as like a young team rebuilding player development coach. He has not yet proven himself as a playoff coach. And we don't know that yet, but it just feels like they are cutting this a little short in my mind. And one more year would have given you a bit more of a sample size, a bit more evidence to go off of. If they struggle again and they flame out again, it becomes a much more serious conversation. It seems like they are cutting bait 1 year too soon in my mind. And if I'm trying to like steel man myself and see the other side of the argument, it really, I guess, is primarily based on the play-in performances. But again, then that goes back to kind of what we were saying earlier. That just seems like such a short-sighted knee-jerk reaction to base it all on that.
Yeah, either this guy is your guy or he's not, or he's not. And just to like make these decisions that have millions of dollars at stake. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Based solely off of that, which again was definitely not a good look. Were two disappointing results, albeit without your most expensive player in both of those games. But yeah, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. My apologies there. But yeah, it's like that's just, there's too much at stake to base it off those two things, if that's all that went into it. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. And like I find it's almost probably not even worth bringing up, but like I find the criticisms of like all the LaMelo stuff like just completely unfounded in my mind. Like this organization has put as much responsibility and playmaking and on LaMelo's shoulders. Like, I feel the LaMelo situation has been handled incredibly well. I think he's progressing in a fine manner. Although, like, obviously in the last pod, we broke down a couple of things we think he still needs to get better at. There's nothing wrong with that. It just feels like there's a lot of unfounded criticism out there. And it feels like all of the legitimate nuanced criticism, which is fair and reasonable and perfectly willing to talk about, and we have been talking about, it's not quite enough for me to feel like they should be making this change unless they have somebody lined up that is, that is very, very experienced and proven, which we'll see, I guess. But like, the playoffs are still in full swing, and I'm sure there's a couple names we can throw around. But
let's do that here, because I've got to actually run in a couple of minutes here. So again, we were not prepared to do this. We did the report card episode last night. We were going to do the second half of the report card episode, record that over the weekend. So we had to
do it for the people, though.
Yeah, exactly. But so some names to throw out. I mean, I saw Spencer tweet this out on Twitter. It's a great one to mention. But Frank Vogel, if you could somehow get Vogel in as a guy that can coordinate and organize a defense, even with imperfect parts, I think you could pretty much quell the Westbrook to Charlotte trade rumors if somehow Vogel was brought into here. I don't see that being the guy, but like, he would be a phenomenal hire. I guess Mark Jackson, he always gets brought up in these discussions. Mark Jackson would not be my pick, but as you may remember, like the last 2 seasons at Golden State, he did at least a decent job helping that thing get off the ground. I mean, obviously Kerr came in and it really jumped up from there. But getting the Warriors from being like, so not great to being a playoff team to winning a playoff series in 2013, I suppose there's something there. But he just always comes up in these conversations. Mike D'Antoni is a guy that would be so much fun to see. He and LaMelo teamed up. But just given, I guess, some of his misgivings as a defensive coach, I can't imagine him being the guy, or if he would be interested in this. Like, he may want more of a win now program than the Hornets, who are they just finished 10th place in the Eastern Conference. Maybe someone like Terry Stotts is another name I saw getting thrown around. But again, that gets back to sort of he was, I think, hit or miss at times as a defensive coach. But my guess is they're going to go older, more experienced. I
got 2 names for you to react to.
Let's hear them.
First is Kenny Atkinson.
That's another name that has to get mentioned. I would be very much here for that, by the way.
I would agree. It feels like a situation that makes sense for him and for us. Obviously, for anybody who's not aware, Kenny Atkinson was the coach of the Brooklyn Nets prior to Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving coming in, and kind of I would say almost unanimously is very respected as a young player development coach. He did a really good job with all those young players Brooklyn had before they kind of shook that roster up. So I'm with you, BG. That seems like a fair name to bring up. Yeah. The only other one I was going to mention is, if the Jazz flame out to a Luka-less Dallas team, could Quinn Snyder be available? And do you like that fit at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would very much. I think Quinn Snyder is a terrific coach. This team-wide meltdown notwithstanding, where Utah is. It seems like LA, the Lakers are interested in him. I think some of the reporting seemed to sort of indicate that. But yeah, Snyder is a phenomenal basketball coach, and I think he would do very well with guys like Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball. And yeah, I think they would jump up a level. Atkinson's been the number 2 guy, I think, for Steve Kerr, or maybe the number 3 guy. I think Mike Brown is still out there with the Warriors, but a top flight assistant coach, was with the Clippers last year. Before that, a couple of years with the Nets, brought them out of irrelevancy into being a solid playoff team before Kyrie and Kevin Durant kind of pushed him out the door. But an assistant with Mike Budenholzer at Atlanta. So pretty good resume to begin with, the last decade plus in the NBA as a head coach or as an assistant. So Atkinson makes a lot of sense. Snyder would be in my opinion, an A+ hire. But I don't see that. I know he spent time. I mean, he went to college at Duke. He worked on Mike Krzyzewski's staff there. So he has somewhat of a footprint in the state as a college coach and a college player. But that's one that's a little hard for me, a little more far-fetched for me to see. So I would say unlikely on Snyder. Atkinson, though, is a name that you're I could just very easily see that,
Yeah, and my last thought here basically is just reiterating something we both kind of said earlier, that is who they hire will obviously affect my opinion of this in a big way. We've both already stated how we feel in the moment, and I feel like I could either be smoothed over or I could get furious, depending on who it is.
It's a lot of variance here, and again, all of this is fresh. This news is only about 2.5 hours old at the point from when we're recording this. But just salute to Coach Borrego, or James Borrego. I thought he did a good job here.
Agreed.
Overall, and I think I'll be curious to see. I'm hopeful that he'll be able to land on his feet, most likely as an assistant, but maybe get another head coaching job at some point in time. And just him, what he did for this franchise, I don't think will be forgotten. Too soon. The good, bad, and the ugly of it. The defense, the flameouts and the play-in, but just really what he did from a culture, player development standpoint, X and O standpoint, does stand out. So he'll be missed, and there are some relatively big shoes for Charlotte to fill because he was a pretty solid coach. So with that, this has been an emergency James Borrego fired episode of the BuzzBeat podcast. That's been Lee, along with myself, Brian Geisinger. Thank you for listening. Make sure to rate, review on Apple, Spotify, all that good stuff. And then obviously part 2 of our player grades coming out early next week with Terry Rozier, Miles Bridges, PJ Washington, and Mason Plumlee. Everyone take care. Have a good weekend.
This season on American Prodigies, Black Girls in Gymnastics. You'll hear about trailblazers like Diane Durham. Learn what you don't know about Dominique Dawes. Meet superstars like Olympic silver medalist Jordan Childs, and more. Hear how Black gymnasts have and continue to transform their sport. You can binge all the episodes of American Prodigies now, wherever you get your podcasts.